Hey everyone, how are you? It's Mrs. Gross. I'm here to review skill O7 on IXL. It's a pretty important skill. It's a review, but we're going to review how to do some different operations with decimals. Okay, so we're going to review how to add and subtract decimals, how to multiply decimals, and how to divide decimals. There are different rules for each operation. Let me put this larger. Oh, wait. I don't know if that worked. Sorry. There's different rules for different operations. When you are, let me get my arrow. When you are adding and subtracting decimals, you need to make sure that you line up them before you can do the operation. Before you add or subtract, you need to line up the decimals. And when you're multiplying and dividing, you don't need to worry about lining up the decimals. There's other things you need to worry about when you're multiplying or dividing, and so we'll get into that in a second. Okay, so we're going to kind of go through adding and subtracting quickly, because I think most of you will remember how to do this. But when you add and subtract decimals, it's very important that you line up your decimals first, okay? So if you saw this problem, you would rewrite it, making sure that you line the decimals up. Okay, so there's 9.89 minus 0.46. Now, I have to make sure I put my decimal there, and then the 4.6, and then I can subtract. Okay, and I'm not going to do, I guess I'll do it quickly for you. 9 minus 6 is 3, 2, and then 9. And then all I do is bring down the decimal point. Okay, same thing with adding. So I have 465 plus 1.321. So I'm going to make sure when I look at 465, I know my decimal point is going to be right here. Okay, because I don't actually see it here. It's a whole number. So it just goes at the end. And then when I add, I'm going to make sure I line up my decimals before I can add. Okay, and if that's looks weird to you, just add placeholders with zeros. And then it might make a little more sense and look more normal. And then you could add. Remembering that when you add and subtract, you just bring down the decimal. There's no other rule. Okay? So adding and subtracting, you need to line up your decimal. When you are multiplying your decimal, like this, 5 and 6/10 times 7/10, it doesn't matter. You do not need to line up your decimal. Just line up the numbers as you would multiply regularly. Okay, so when I see this, I'm going to kind of ignore the decimals for a second and just line it up like a normal multiplication problem. Okay, but then do not forget to add in your decimals. Okay, and then you'll do your multiplication as normal. Okay, and then when you get your answer, you have to notice how many decimal places are in each factor. So in 5.6, I have one decimal place. And in 7/10, I have one decimal place. So my answer should have two decimal places, 1, 2. So I'm going to start at the end and jump over 1, 2 decimal points. So there's my answer, 3.92. So multiplying decimals, don't need to line up your decimals, but you need to make sure that you count up how many decimal places are in each factor and make sure your product has that amount. Okay. Now, dividing decimals is where a lot of us run into some problems. Dividing, you don't need to line up your decimals. But what you have to do is if your divisor has a decimal, you have to move it over so you kind of get rid of the decimal. And then you have to move your dividend that amount of places too. So let me show you an example. 57 divided by 4/10. So if I set up my problem, I'm going to do 57 divided by 4/10. You notice my divisor has a decimal point, and I can't have that. So I'm going to move it over so I get rid of that decimal point. So now it's kind of like 4. My divisor is 4. And whatever I do over to my divisor, I have to do to my dividend. So here's my decimal point for 57. I'm going to move it over one place. Add a placeholder if you need to. Put the decimal here. And then always bring the decimal up so you don't forget it. And then you're going to divide as normal. 4 goes into 5 once. Uh-oh, I hope I don't run out of room. 4 goes into 17 4 times. 17 minus 16. Uh-oh. 1. Bring down my 0. 4 goes into 10 twice. Oh no, let's see. Am I going to run out of room? So 4 goes into 10 twice. 10. Oh no, you guys can probably see this. 10 minus 8 is 2. Now, in 5th grade, we don't use remainders unless we're making a mixed number. So what we would do with this is we wouldn't say 142 remainder 2. We would add a 0 after our decimal and bring it down and divide all over again. 4 goes into 20 5 times. So my answer is 142 and 5/10. Maybe in 4th grade or in the beginning of 5th grade, you might have said your answer was 142 remainder 2. But in 5th grade, we don't do that. We keep dividing until we get an answer, or you round to whatever place it's asking you to. But so this answer would be 142 and 5/10. Okay. Let's do a couple more division problems because those seem to be the hardest. All right, so let's look at this one. 24 and 8/10 divided by 1 and 6/10. So I'm going to set it up. And I have to remember the rule when I divide. If my divisor has a decimal, it does. I have to move it over to kind of get rid of the decimal. So now instead of 1.6, it's now 16. And whatever I do to my divisor, I do to my dividend. Bring it over. And don't forget to bring your decimal up. And then divide as normal. 16 goes into 2 no times. 16 goes into 24 once. That's 8. Bring down my 8. 16 goes into 88. Let's see. I did the work on the side before I did this. I got to just find it. 5 times. And that's 80. With 8 left over. And now I'm not going to use that as my remainder. What I'm going to do is add a 0 and bring it down and keep dividing until I can't go any longer. 16 goes into 80. It happens to go in 5 times evenly. So my answer is 15 and 5/10. Okay, let's do another one. 4 and 61/100 divided by 200. Now, first rule when you're dividing by decimals, if you notice that your divisor has a decimal, you got to get rid of it by moving it over. So I'll move it 1 space, 2 spaces. And the decimal will be there. Whatever I do here, 1, 2, put it there, and then move it up to my quotient. Okay, and then just divide as normal. 2 goes into 4 twice with nothing left over. Bring it down. 2 goes into 6 3 times. Nothing left over. Now this is tricky because can 2 go into 1? No. So I'm going to say 0. 2 times 0 is 0. Bring it down. And then I'm not going to say remainder 1. I'm going to add a 0. Bring it down. And 2 goes into 10 5 times. So there is my final answer. Okay. So just refer to this slideshow if you need to remember all the rules for the different operations. Okay. And I hope you enjoyed it and I hope it was helpful. Okay. Have a good night. Bye.